Now, where did I... Ah. So, you know when you're trying to talk about something, and you find it really difficult not making the conversation a giant glowing endorsement, even when the issues you did have were the kind of thing that makes you want to go Mason Verger on your own face? There, in a nutshell, do you have my experience with Diluvion, the deep sea action exploration game from Arachnid Games. I caught the trailer for this a while back, and right away, the concept and artwork itself sold me. They pretty heavily emphasized their inspirations from Jules Verne, but were it not for the slavering dragon that is copyright law and Disney's legal team looming overhead, they'd likely be quicker to cite Atlantis, the Lost Empire, as their main inspiration. At least stylistically. Which definitely isn't a bad thing. I feel like that's one of those Disney movies that didn't get enough appreciation for how well it was crafted and the actual animation style itself, even if the story left a lot to be desired. Thankfully, the narrative in Diluvion feels a lot stronger, at least in my opinion, probably in part because of how simple and straightforward the concept is. To sum things up with as few spoilers as possible, humanity had things made up on the surface of the world. We fucked it up by being greedy assholes, the gods smote us down, and humanity has sunk beneath the waves to survive, while a thick layer of ice formed over top. Generations later, society has reformed, for better or for worse, and you play an independent submarine captain, just trying to survive and make their way in a civilization that has only ever been able to dream of seeing the sun. Now, before I get into the gameplay, which is mostly really fun, I have to address this one Yog-Sothoth-sized elephant in the room, the save system. What the actual fuck is with this save system? The way it basically works is that you get one save file per game, and the game saves automatically based on checkpoints. All of that is fine to me. I'm a big fan of roguelike games. Dark Souls is one of my favorite games, and they all operate on this general structure, and that's okay. The problem is what actually gets saved when you reach a checkpoint. Upon entering one of the green shoals that represent a save point in the game, the two things that the game's save system seems to focus on is your current submarine status, which includes your crew and your resources, and where you are in the game story itself, based on your last plot point. For example, entering a pretty heavily story-based area where there's not a lot going on combat-wise, but you're getting a series of prompts, dialogue prompts from your crew, which you stop and you read through and answer questions, and it's pretty straightforward RPG stuff. But having finally reached the battle that was at the end of said dialogue, it became very clear to me that I was not ready for this fight yet. So, being wise, I boogied the fuck out of Dodge, got to a nearby station, and resupplied, intending to turn back around and take down the enemies just a second later. The problem is, as I was approaching this fight, not going slowly because I figured I've already heard all the dialogue, I know what's going to happen, I can just start the combat. No, you get bombarded with every single dialogue prompt all at once, which is incredibly distracting when you're trying to track your shots. And note, I hadn't died in between these two encounters. I had already heard them. The game should have registered that I had heard this dialogue before, but because when you reach the save point, it resets your current checkpoint to wherever you last were, you're gonna have to go through it all over again, even if you manage not to die. It's almost like you're being punished for knowing when you should escape from a fight. They're encouraging you just to go balls to the wall and die every time, and not be particularly tactical. But see, even that's just a minor gripe compared to the real issue that this particular save system has been causing. Unlike games such as the Souls series with very similar types of save systems, Diluvion has made no effort to mitigate the kind of problems that can arise from this type of saving. For example, while most of these checkpoints are around certain hubs or towns, there are some that are right next to boss encounters, which you can very easily end up navigating through by accident, which, should you be unlucky enough to die during that fight, will probably find you very low on resources, very frustrated, and more than modestly confused. Of course, it doesn't help that the fights themselves respawn much like Dark Souls, but unlike that series, there is no reclaiming your destroyed gear. And no, there is no lore reason for why any of this happens. There are no Revita tanks, there is no respawning. As far as the game is concerned, you never left that hub from where you were the last time. even if a fight that can't ever have happened has drained you of resources that you apparently can't ever have gathered. So I think what I'm saying here is that every time this save issue comes up, we create an alternate timeline, a progressively shittier, more frustrating, more grind-heavy timeline. Because there is no way of regaining those lost resources without just farming for salvage. If I were to offer any suggestion on how to address this, me personally, I would love to see them implement a game mode that actually disables saving during combat, keeping the results of death from a boss encounter or other fight a lot more consistent. It'll lead to a lot less of these frustrating moments where you realize you've just been sentenced to several hours of mindless, vaguely boring grinding just to catch back up to where you already rightfully should be as of your last actual save. And thankfully, I actually could see this developer putting that into the game. They've responded swimmingly to player feedback right after their initial release. A lot of people hated the way the camera controls and the submarines themselves navigated and handled, and within a couple of days, they patched in a new control scheme. Yeah, they patched in a new scheme while leaving the old one as an option. They've even added in an option that makes the navigation system a little bit easier for those who found it particularly hard. None of this, we want to stay consistent to our vision of the game, horseshit. No, fuck that. They did exactly what people asked, but didn't make it the default. They made it an option, which is important because I like the navigation as it is by default. I thought it was enthralling that I had to locate actual landmarks within my field of view in the world, compare that to the map of what I have already discovered, and then use my compass to find and plan my heading. Not having a personal player marker on the map to show your position, I thought was actually a nice touch, but you know, enough people apparently complained and gave negative feedback, so they actually included it. Gameplay itself alternates between the 3D overworld, or I guess you could say underworld, for movement and combat, and a two-dimensional internal environment, where you'll handle most of your resource and crew management, and where most of the RPG elements take place. I found swapping between the 3D and the 2D aspects really difficult. A gamepad is the suggested method for doing most of the core meat of the game. The actual core gameplay is best played with a controller. The problem is, the 2D environments are absolute ass to navigate with a controller of any sort. I used the Steam controller myself and that made it a little bit easier, but I still found it was way easier and more intuitive just to reach over and use my mouse whenever I found myself inside somewhere. Once I got used to it, I actually found controlling and combat inside my ship to be a lot of fun, and really the best part of the entire game, especially after they added the modified control scheme. The targeting can admittedly be a little twitchy, and it feels inaccurate at times, but that has helped a lot by having the right crew members at the right stations. Crew management is essential to effective combat. You're basically firing blind if you don't crew your gunnery and torpedo stations with pretty decent crew members. It really is the difference between barely surviving and complete domination over the sea. The game offers a few different kinds of submarine, and they all have different layouts and specializations, and you'll upgrade them throughout the course of the game, striving for that constant goal of reaching the deepest depths of the ocean. I found the docking mechanic to be a little fucky at times. Ships basically use grappling hooks and bungee lines to pull each other to one another in order to find a spot in which they can dock. And that can lead to some amusing, if frustrating, swing dances between two subs or a sub in a station whenever you're trying to dock, which means speed better not be of the fucking essence to you right at that particular moment. Really, with Diluvion, the fun for me was where my expectations for the game ended and what the game actually had to offer began. I went in expecting a true exploration game. You know, where non-violent adventuring and exploring could be a viable playstyle and an actual way to get to the end of the game, which, to be perfectly fair to myself, the game does nothing to contradict all the way up until the first boss. At no point for that entire time are you forced, either by the story or by a map design itself, to actually engage in combat unless you want to. It is a rude awakening when your relatively combat ineffective vessel, mostly leaning towards increasing your sensors and speed, is suddenly pitted against a real true enemy for the first time. In reality, the exploration is more scavenging. than anything else. It's a means to an end toward gaining the resources required to take on the next big baddie or to move to the next upgrade of your ship. The RPG aspects are very bare-boned, much to my disappointment. It's really just getting you through the story via dialogue, and not much more. You do assemble your crew, as is implied in a lot of the marketing material in the trailer, but that doesn't include your officers, and the procedurally generated crew members you can recruit throughout the game. Honestly, it feels almost pointless to make them have personalities and dialogue options, because they're very nearly just repeats of one another, and nothing about them is particularly unique. You inevitably end with a group of very samey looking mannequins hanging out in your submarine, really acting as nothing more than placeholders for your stats. You also have access to quote-unquote home bases within the game, places that you buy and then slowly upgrade with new modules over time. But the thing is, I don't really see their purpose. They don't act as a save point, which you'd think would be a fundamental function of a home base, but they do generate high-level crew members to recruit for a lot of money. So really, they're just money sinks. They don't otherwise seem to have a real point. The writing can be a little amateurish at times. Some of the characters really heavily rely on common tropes. But overall, the dialogue is actually pretty good, and they do feed you just enough story to make you curious about what comes next. It really does keep compelling you to move forward in the story. Though, I am very strongly compelled to ask, why the hell does everyone wear these weird pointy party hat things? I mean, there's no rain, there's no sky. I guess maybe to help from the drips coming from above your head in underwater housing environments, but I mean, if your home is dripping and you live in the deep sea, I think you have some fucking problems that are not helped by a goddamn hat. One thing I do want to make a big point to shout out to is the soundtrack to this game. Holy fuck me twice with a rake. Is this music perfect for the environment they've fostered in this game? I honestly can't see myself having actually forced my way through the little problems and misconceptions I had to get through if the music wasn't so beautiful and on point. Once you get past what you might expect from Diluvion and accept what we actually get, there's a lot to appreciate, regardless of all the little issues and that one huge glaring problem. $20 is, for me, a fair entry price for the experience and the content offered. Though it must be noted, these absolute madmen opted to release the game as part of their publisher's sale week, giving the game a discount at release. Such a classy fucking move in my book. If nothing else, at least keep in mind that with this developer and with this game, you're getting people who have shown they care about your feedback and they care about you as a customer and are not interested in fucking you over unnecessarily.